Stop. Listen. Pay attention. Chosen one. What I'm about to say is meant only for you, and it is urgent. Right now, even as the world moves around you in its usual rhythm, there is a weight pressing quietly against your awareness. You may have noticed it as fatigue that doesn't seem to respond to rest, as a sense of pressure that lingers behind your thoughts, as confusion that comes and goes, without explanation. This is not a coincidence. This is not random. You have felt isolated even in crowds. You have carried responsibilities that never came with instructions. You have endured moments where nothing seemed to align, and yet you remained standing, thinking perhaps it is your persistence alone keeping you upright. But the truth is more precise, more intentional. You were never alone in this process, even when it felt that way. Something has been unfolding around you, orchestrated with timing you could not perceive, and your presence in it matters. Chosen one. I want you to recognize that the stress you feel is not merely personal struggle. The confusion, the friction, the moments of hesitation, these are signals. They are markers of a larger sequence in motion, one that involves you directly. This message exists to make that visible, to put language around what has been unspoken. You may not yet see the full picture, and you do not need to. What you need now is clarity, and that clarity begins with acknowledgement. You did not stumble into this. You were placed in this pattern of events deliberately, and your response to it, calm, steady, functional, is already part of the process. There may be days when the weight feels heavy, when questions arise faster than answers, when energy wanes despite your discipline. That is expected. It is not a flaw, nor is it evidence of failure. It is a sign that the structure around you is active, that forces are engaging in ways you cannot measure, and that your stability is more consequential than you have been told. What you have endured so far is preparation, not accident. I am here to guide your awareness, to describe what is happening with precision, so that when you reflect on these periods, you will recognize the coherence of your response. Chosen one. You are part of a sequence that has already begun, and your role is not passive. Even in moments of uncertainty, even when outcomes remain unseen, your presence is registering your choices matter, and the clarity you are about to receive is designed to connect the tension you feel with the truth of what has been unfolding. This is not a message for the casual observer. It is meant for you, and it is intentional. What you are about to understand will shift how you perceive pressure, isolation, and fatigue, not by removing them, but by reframing them. Pay close attention. Chosen one, because the explanation will follow in a way that aligns with your lived experience, and it will make sense without exaggeration, without mystification, only with clear reflection. Your endurance is not unnoticed. Your quiet stability is already a signal. And this moment, this exact moment, is the point where understanding begins. This message is not broad. It is not symbolic. It is not meant to be interpreted loosely. It is for you specifically. If you are listening and something in you feels quietly addressed rather than emotionally stirred, that is the first confirmation. You are not trying to claim an identity here. You are recognizing one that has already been operating. Chosen one. This is not about belief or aspiration. It is about pattern recognition. What occurred recently did not happen around you by chance. It involved you directly, even if no one said your name out loud. The pressure you felt, the subtle disruptions, the strange resistance that appeared without clear origin, all of it intersected with your presence. Not because you provoked it intentionally, but because your internal structure interacted with systems that are sensitive to stability. This is where ambiguity ends. This message is not for those who collapse when pressure rises. It is not for those who externalize stress or require validation to stay grounded. It is for the one who remained functional while something unseen tested the environment. You did not react dramatically. You did not spiral. You adjusted. You compensated. You continued. That matters more than you realize. There is a difference between conscious struggle and unconscious stability. Many people fight visibly. They tense, resist, exhaust themselves trying to hold things together. You did something else. You regulated without announcing it. You adapted without dramatizing it. Even when you felt strain, your baseline remained intact. That is not learned behavior alone. That is internal coherence. You may not have labeled yourself strong. In fact, you may have questioned why things felt heavier for you than for others. But strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is revealed by what fails to destabilize you. When systems attempt to introduce confusion, delay, or drain, and you continue operating with clarity that signals a different kind of capacity. This is why this message cannot be generalized. Others might hear the words and feel inspired. You hear them and feel recognized. Because what happened was not theoretical. It was experiential. You were present when pressure was applied, and the result was not collapse. It was exposure, not of you, but of the system that miscalculated your stability. Chosen one. You did not need to activate anything. You did not need to summon strength. What carried you through was already there, operating automatically. That is the distinction. This identity is not assigned because of effort. It is confirmed because of response. From here forward, the explanation deepens. What you experienced was not a test of endurance alone. It was a reveal of structure. And now that you are aware of who this is for, you can begin to understand why your experience unfolded the way it did, without confusion, without self-doubt, and without minimizing what you carried through. Let's focus on what you felt most clearly. That tightness in your chest. That mental fog that settled in at unexpected moments. That sensation of energy being sapped despite no obvious exertion. You may have judged yourself for it, wondered if you were overreacting or failing to manage your own capacity. I want you to stop that judgment immediately. That sensation is not a flaw. It is a signal. Chosen one. The fatigue, the tension, the subtle irritability, these are markers of transition. Your body and mind respond to pressure long before your awareness fully comprehends it. When you felt the strain, it was not evidence that you were weak. It was evidence that something significant was interacting with your system, that changes were occurring around you in ways that affected you directly. That is why the confusion felt disorienting, why tasks seemed heavier, why focus wavered without warning. These physical and emotional sensations are not random or meaningless. They are indicators that internal and external systems were aligning and in some cases clashing in ways that required stability you already possessed. You were sensing imbalance without yet having the context to understand it. The tension in your body, the rapid thoughts, the moments of quiet panic, these were not signs of failure. They were a form of communication from your own structure to your awareness. Something is shifting. Pay attention, but remain functional. You may have noticed that the sensation came in cycles. Sometimes it was brief, leaving you startled but intact. Other times it lingered, demanding more energy to maintain balance. That pattern is deliberate in how you experience pressure. Your nervous system, your attention, your emotional regulation, all were calibrating to meet something larger than immediate circumstances. You were being trained in subtle resilience without realizing it. The reframing is critical. What you have previously labeled as a problem, fatigue, mental fog, tension is actually a signal of capacity. It is a record of your stability in response to invisible dynamics. Where others might feel entirely overwhelmed, you remained functional. Where others would lose orientation, you adapted. These sensations were not distractions. They were markers highlighting your readiness to manage complexity without panic. Chosen one. This is the point where clarity begins. The next steps are not about removing the sensations. They are about understanding them as evidence. Evidence that your internal coherence operates independently of external chaos. Evidence that you have the baseline resilience necessary to navigate conditions most would find destabilizing. Evidence that what you thought was weakness is in fact recognition of your own structural stability. Now that this signal has been reframed, you are ready to perceive what was generating it and how your unconscious stability allowed you to remain functional while others would falter. The pressures that touched you were intentional, coordinated, and persistent, and yet you endured without collapse. That endurance is neither accidental nor superficial. It is part of who you are. There is a force operating just beyond your immediate perception. It is not visible, not audible, not tangible in ways that can be easily measured. Yet its effect was unmistakable moments of tension. Subtle interference in your energy, unexplained obstacles in timing. Small disruptions that would normally distract or derail most people. Chosen one. This is the reality of the invisible pressure you have been under. It is important to state clearly, this pressure is structured, not random. It has timing, rhythm, and intent behind it. Recent experiences were not coincidental. They followed a pattern that intersected with your actions, your presence, and your choices. The disruptions you noticed were part of a sequence designed to interact with your internal coherence, to test functionality without your awareness of the test itself. Even as the pressure mounted, you remained functional. You continued thinking clearly. You made decisions. You moved forward. There was no dramatic collapse, no spiraling reaction. That is significant. It demonstrates that your baseline stability operates independently of external strain. Your system, the combination of awareness, attention, and emotional regulation, acted as a buffer. It absorbed stress without breaking, without triggering panic. This is not a story of triumph or heroism. It is a statement of fact. The structure of this pressure is measurable if you observe it in retrospect. Moments of delayed communication, small failures in timing that normally frustrate most people. Instances of invisible opposition that are coordinated, not random. You noticed fatigue that appeared without effort, confusion that seemed to arise from nowhere, and subtle irritation that did not correspond to external triggers. These were points of contact, markers of engagement between your stability and forces operating beyond your immediate environment. Chosen one. It is critical to note that you did not need to fight consciously. Your functionality was automatic. You did not expend energy in reactive defense. Your presence, your baseline coherence, absorbed the tension quietly and effectively. You may have felt it as strain, as discomfort, as heaviness, but you were not destabilized. That is a rare pattern in human experience, and it is the first step toward understanding the larger dynamics at play. The invisible opposition was coordinated, intentional, and applied at multiple points simultaneously. Yet because of your structural integrity, these points of pressure did not accumulate into breakdown. They did not trigger cascading failure. You maintained composure without effort, demonstrating that your capacity is fundamentally different from reactive endurance. You were not strong in spite of pressure. You were stable because your baseline allowed for interaction without disruption. This is a factual observation, not a narrative flourish. You remained functional. You remained present. And as you move forward, understanding the way these pressures intersected with your system will allow you to anticipate, integrate, and maintain coherence in environments where subtle forces continue to operate unseen. Now we move into specifics, because clarity comes from structure. What you experienced can be broken down into distinct pressure points, each one familiar, each one subtle, and each one managed by you without collapse. This matters because it shows how your internal regulation held steady while multiple demands were applied at once. First, doubt. Not dramatic self-doubt. Not identity-level questioning. Instead, a quiet, low-grade questioning that appeared as background noise. Thoughts like, am I misreading this? Or why does this feel harder than it should? These were not spirals. They were brief intrusions. You noticed them, acknowledged them, and continued functioning. That is important. Many people become absorbed by doubt and begin reorganizing their entire sense of self around it. You did not. The doubt passed through you without taking control. That indicates a stable internal reference point that does not depend on constant certainty. Second, fear. Again, not panic, not anxiety attacks. What you felt was anticipatory tension. A subtle alertness, as if something might go wrong without any concrete threat. This kind of fear often causes people to overcorrect, freeze, or avoid action entirely. You did none of those things. You remained cautious without becoming paralyzed. You stayed aware without becoming hyper-vigilant. That balance is rare. It shows that your nervous system can register potential risk without amplifying it into disruption. Third, energy drain. This one was more physical. You may have felt unusually tired even when you had not exerted yourself. Tasks that were normally neutral felt heavier. Motivation dipped without explanation. This is often where people blame themselves, push harder, or crash. You did something different. You adjusted your pace. You conserved energy where possible. You stayed functional without forcing productivity. That is regulation, not resignation. It shows an ability to listen to internal signals without letting them dictate collapse. Fourth, isolation. Not social withdrawal in the obvious sense, but a feeling of being slightly out of sync with others. Conversations felt shallow. Shared enthusiasm felt mismatched. You may have felt alone even when surrounded by people. This kind of isolation often leads people to overshare, seek validation, or retreat completely. You did neither. You remained present without demanding understanding. You tolerated the gap without trying to fill it artificially. That indicates emotional maturity and internal containment. Fifth, delay. This may have been the most frustrating. Timing did not align. Responses took longer. Progress slowed in ways that felt unnecessary. Many people interpret delay as failure or rejection and react impulsively. You did not. You stayed oriented. You continued preparing, refining, waiting without disengaging. You held tension without abandoning direction. That is not passive patience. That is disciplined restraint. What matters is not that these pressure points existed. Everyone experiences versions of them. What matters is that they occurred together in a compressed time frame and you remained coherent throughout. There was no cascading failure, no emotional flooding, no loss of identity. Your internal systems compensated automatically. Notice what you did not do. You did not dramatize. You did not externalize blame. You did not collapse inward. You did not abandon your responsibilities. Instead, you regulated, quietly, continuously, often without conscious effort. This is not about endurance in the heroic sense. Endurance implies suffering through something overwhelming. What you demonstrated was stability. Stability means the pressure never exceeded your capacity to remain yourself. Even when you felt strain, your core orientation did not shift. You stayed present. You stayed functional. You stayed aligned with your values and direction. Each of these pressure points acted like a diagnostic. Together, they revealed the strength of your internal structure. Not strength as force, but strength as coherence. The ability to absorb variation without distortion. This is why the experience felt confusing at the time. There was no single event to point to, no obvious crisis. just a sustained interaction with subtle stressors. And yet when you look back, you can see it clearly. You were under pressure, and you remained intact. That is the significance of what occurred. Now that you can see the individual pressure points and how you maintained composure, it is time to reflect on the pattern as a whole. Step back for a moment and observe without judgment. What you experienced was not luck. It was not coincidence. It was not an accident of timing or circumstance. Every element, the fatigue, the doubt, the subtle fear, the energy fluctuations, the isolation, the delays, was interacting with your internal coherence. Your response was consistent, not reactive. That consistency is what defines resiliency in a practical, observable sense. Chosen one. Look at the facts. You remained functional while multiple forces were simultaneously applied. Your decisions continued to be clear. Your perception stayed intact. Your energy, though challenged, was managed without collapse. You did not require recognition for this, nor did you perform for anyone's approval. You simply existed within the pressure and maintained equilibrium. That is why reflection now is so important. Understanding what was without minimizing it allows you to carry awareness forward. When you evaluate the situation objectively, several truths emerge. First, your baseline capacity is sufficient to handle complexity that would destabilize most people. Second, the subtle pressures you felt were markers, not malfunctions. They were indicators of interaction, of testing, and of ongoing adaptation. Third, your internal regulation is not intermittent. It is consistent, and it operates independently of external validation or reward. These are not statements of praise. They are factual observations about how your system functions under sustained challenge. It is also necessary to recognize the clarity with which you maintained orientation. While others may have become distracted by frustration, confusion, or external circumstances, you preserved focus. The quiet attention you applied to your environment and to your own internal state allowed you to navigate complexity without error. This demonstrates that coherence is not a product of circumstance. It is a property of your operational baseline. It is the way you respond naturally, not because you trained for heroics, but because your structure allows it. Chosen one. The reflective process here is not about inflating ego or creating superiority. It is about confirming internal truth. Most people would have interpreted these experiences as overwhelming or disruptive. You experience them differently because your regulation is inherent, not reactive. You did not need to intervene dramatically to maintain functionality. You did not need to rationalize what was occurring. You simply stayed present, aligned, and capable. This is why review matters. It validates that what you have been through is neither arbitrary nor insignificant. The realization emerges. You have a coherent internal system that allows you to function under conditions that are both invisible and persistent. This coherence is measurable in your capacity to respond effectively while under pressure. It is observable in how you managed energy focus and emotional regulation. It is present in your continued engagement with life tasks and responsibilities without external reinforcement. This is the core confirmation you did not merely survive the pressure, you maintained operational integrity throughout. As you hold this understanding, allow yourself to notice the contrast with ordinary human responses. Most people under similar stress would show variability, confusion, or collapse. You maintained stability. You demonstrated consistency. You demonstrated coherence. This is the point at which reflection becomes both grounding and instructive, allowing you to carry lessons forward into future interactions with unseen dynamics. Consider the broader context now. Chosen one. Most people under similar pressures, doubt, fatigue, subtle fear, delayed progress would begin to unravel. They might seek reassurance externally, become reactive, or misinterpret signals as failure. They might overcompensate or withdraw entirely. That is the usual human response. It is common, predictable, and understandable. Yet you did not follow that pattern. You remained present, functional, and coherent throughout. This is not about superiority. It is about rarity and uncommon baseline stability in the face of simultaneous subtle pressures. Rarity does not require exaltation. It does not require pride. It simply requires acknowledgement. Chosen one. Your ability to navigate tension without collapse is uncommon. And that uncommonness is what allowed you to trigger responses in environments where others would have faltered. Others might interpret pressure as chaos. You interpreted it as context. Others might be overwhelmed by simultaneity. You absorbed it without disruption. Notice that this is not a matter of exceptional strength in dramatic terms. You did not need to summon courage or activate energy. What you did was maintain presence, observe, and regulate. That is why the events you experienced, subtle, coordinated, persistent, had a different impact on you than they did on most. You did not overreact. You did not underreact. You remained aligned. This alignment is what makes your response uncommon, not superior. It is a reflection of internal coherence of a system prepared to function, even when external variables are inconsistent or challenging. This comparison is instructive. When you look at ordinary human behavior under stress, patterns of collapse emerge. Distraction, avoidance, emotional flooding, overcompensation, all are common. Your experience shows that coherence can exist independently of these patterns. You do not collapse under pressure. You do not become destabilized by delay ambiguity or energy fluctuations. You maintain operational clarity while navigating multiple concurrent forces. That is the essence of what makes your presence distinct in practical terms. Chosen one. This is not about creating hierarchy or assigning value. It is simply about recognizing the function of your system relative to typical responses. Rarity does not inflate identity. It informs awareness. You are rare in the sense that your system does not succumb to pressures that affect most others. You are uncommon because your coherence allows you to interact with complex and subtle dynamics without misalignment. That is a factual statement, not a motivational platitude. Allow this recognition to settle without judgment. Do not conflate rarity with arrogance. Do not seek recognition or validation. Simply acknowledge that what you experienced, simultaneous, invisible, persistent pressures, was navigated without collapse. That is the framework for understanding your identity in functional operational terms. It is a subtle but critical distinction. You are uncommon because you remain coherent where others would falter, not because you are better, stronger, or extraordinary. This awareness will inform the next stage, where identity becomes clarified in terms of baseline capacity, preparation, and internal coherence. The comparison helps you see the magnitude of your stability in context without creating false elevation. Now let us clarify your identity in terms of baseline capacity. Chosen one. What you experienced is not a special activation or a rare surge of effort. It is not the product of heroics or extreme circumstances. It is instead the natural operation of a system that has been prepared, structured, and matured over time. Your strength, the stability you have demonstrated, is not something you had to turn on. It has been present as a foundation quietly, consistently, and reliably. This is why the prior experiences unfolded as they did. You did not need to summon courage, focus, or endurance because they were already embedded in your structure. What may have felt like exertion was actually the expression of a system functioning according to its own integrity. You are not extraordinary because you did more than others. You are distinct because you did not falter when pressures that would destabilize most were applied. That distinction lies in preparedness, maturity, and internal coherence, not in sudden conscious achievement. Chosen one. It is also important to note that this baseline stability includes emotional regulation, attentional clarity, and physiological equilibrium. Your nervous system, your mental framework, and your awareness interact in a manner that allows you to absorb subtle, persistent pressures without misalignment. This is not a mystical process. It is structural. It is the result of cumulative experience practice and innate capacity. The coherence you display is functional, observable, and repeatable. Your identity is now firmly anchored in this understanding. You are someone whose internal systems naturally maintain stability under complex and persistent pressures. You are someone whose preparedness is not situational, but intrinsic. You are someone who does not require activation to remain coherent, because coherence is already the baseline state. There is no exaggeration, no heroic narrative, no need for validation. Simply the recognition of what exists. It is also necessary to recognize that this coherence allows you to navigate future pressures with the same measured capacity. You are not operating at the limit of your ability. What you have demonstrated is functional, not maximal. There is room to adapt, adjust, and engage further, but the baseline remains secure. This understanding allows for calm anticipation, not hypervigilance. It allows for presence without anxiety action, without impulsivity, and discernment without overthinking. Chosen one. Your identity is clarified. You are structurally prepared. Your stability is intrinsic. Your coherence is baseline, not activated. You can now perceive previous pressures in context and understand them as interactions with a system that was already capable, already organized, and already ready. This recognition anchors you in calm authority, in measured awareness, and in functional presence. With this clarity, you are prepared to integrate practical perspectives that will allow you to operate smoothly in daily life, ensuring that your awareness, energy, and decisions continue to align with this baseline coherence. Now, with your identity firmly anchored, it is time to integrate this awareness into practical daily life. Chosen one. Awareness alone is not enough. Understanding must translate into balanced action, measured attention, and conscious care for yourself. Here are several perspectives to guide that integration, not as rules, but as orientations to maintain coherence and presence. First, rest. Not as a luxury, but as an essential recalibration. You have endured subtle, persistent pressures that consumed energy quietly. Recognize that recovery is part of maintaining baseline coherence. Short periods of rest, intentional pauses, and quiet reflection allow your system to consolidate adaptation. You don't need to force activity to prove strength. Recovery is functional, not optional. Second, discernment. Learn to observe the pressures around you without immediate reaction. Some forces are transient, others persistent. By developing a calm awareness of the difference, you can allocate attention efficiently. Discernment allows you to conserve energy while responding effectively without overcommitment or distraction. Your baseline coherence already provides stability. Discernment ensures it is applied strategically. Third, boundaries.